Well, this was a story about my World Dynamics book, which I thought had everything necessary to guarantee that there would be no public notice. First of all, it has 40 pages of equations in the middle of it. The interesting material were computer-generated graphs that most people can't read. It was brought out by a publisher that published one previous book, probably did not have the commercial status to be reviewed, and all the interesting material was 50 or 100 years in the future, and therefore presumably beyond the interest band of any reader. And I thought it was for maybe 20 to 50 people who had computers that would like to put it on their machines and play with it. What I did was to go to the news kiosk in Harvard Square that had a lot of out-of-state and out-of-country newspapers. And I bought a whole bunch of them and looked through them to see which journalist might possibly be interested in the World Dynamics method and send him a book. The result of this was that the book was debated in the Zero Population Growth Press, the Anti-Establishment Press, the Zero Population Growth Press. It ran through the editorial columns of mid-American newspapers. It was the subject of a primetime television documentary in Europe. It had the full front page of the second section of the Christian Science Monitor in July. It had a page-and-a-half fortune in September, a column or two in the Wall Street Journal in October. And if you don't like their literature on either the establishment right or the establishment left, then right in the middle of the political spectrum, it had a full-length article in Playboy. It seemed as if everything that could happen in the media had happened, and Limit to Growth came out 9 months later, and it seemed like it would be an anticlimax because all the publicity already occurred. And it just shows you can be wrong twice in a row in the same way. The public notice and the public debate went up a factor of 10 from where it had been. Why? Well, I was accused of knowing how to manipulate the press. Well, if that were true, I had a lot better uses for that. But I think the issue was that those two books dealt with things that people were deeply troubled about and wanted to understand and wanted to see where the future lay. And I believe that our work in System Dynamics in K-12 fully qualifies on all of those accounts if it can be packaged, written up, and presented in a way that gets public attention. I was encouraging people at the table to think about doing the things necessary to get this story outside of this group and into the public. And I believe it can be done, but it's going to require some thought. But you can start it at the local level. You can look at your own newspapers and decide which columnists, they don't have to be in any particular field, which columnists are concerned about the state of the future or the welfare of the country. Go talk to them and give them some material and invite them to come and visit the school and see if you maybe can entice them into writing an article. I think we've got to break through to a public that wants to have something happen. Well, the public does want to have something happen in K-12. They know it's not working. And what we have in K-12 is something that we have seen time after time in corporations. That is, that people think they know the solution to the problem that they're in. They do not realize that what they're doing to solve the problem is in fact the cause of the problem. And so the more difficulty they're in, the more they try to do what they think is the solution, which is in fact making matters worse. And I think this is going on in the whole No Child Left Behind, the whole testing. The emphasis is in doing more and more of the very things that are causing the problem. And we need to put a foot in that too, in that lake.
So do you still know anybody at Playboy?
Well, the consequence of that article was very interesting. I was called one day by a man from the National Council of Churches, and I thought he was asking for the standard 40 minutes to fill out his program. And he was organizing a program for his annual meeting of the Board of Overseas Missions. And as I talked to him, it didn't seem to be quite what he wanted, and I began to realize he was asking me to take charge of the whole 2.5 days. That seemed very daring from somebody. I had no idea who he was. I had never dealt with the National Council of Churches. And I said, why did you happen to call me? And I thought I didn't get an answer. After a while, I asked that question again. I didn't think I got an adequate answer. And the third time, I said, look, we're not going to say another thing until you tell me why you called me. So I could hear him shuffling papers on his desk and said, well, I've been reading this article by Richard Goff, executive editor of Playboy. 8 million copies of Playboy published, and the only response I ever got was from the National Council.
And they didn't even look at the pictures, you know?
The speech, or a paper that came from the speech that Jay gave at that National Council, is in a book called Toward Global Equilibrium. So it's still available. You can still read his speech. This point of trying to find people who have an interest in these issues is, I think, a crucial one, because they don't have a lot of other stuff to use. I mean, there's not much out there. I wanted at one point to start a program that would have a major impact on U.S. energy policy. And in order to find my partners, I went around in the country, Washington, New York, and so forth, and I asked the question, what do you think is going to happen over the next 20 years with energy? I didn't actually care what they answered. I only cared that they had some thought about it. Most people said, I don't know, I never thought about it. And so I took them off my list. But if a few people would give me some kind of an answer, I may have agreed with them or I may not have, but I didn't care about that. I only cared that they were actually thinking about long-term issues. And I put them together into a team, and that became a very effective way to bring system dynamics out into the area that has something to do with energy policy.
Well, just picking up on something that Jay said, I think that it's just important for all of us to remember that the concern is really deep, and there's just no doubt about it. I don't think anybody, anywhere in the world, frankly, is very happy with their school systems. Even the ones that get touted as being really kind of best in the world, like Singapore and Finland. So I think, in that sense, there is the wonderful, really great conditions for something to change. But I think the other part of it is there's, we'll just speak now in this country, because it may be a little different in different countries, but I only hesitate because I don't live in other countries. In this country, I'd say there's a tremendous sense of fatalism and pessimism. I think people are really, really, not only one, deeply concerned, they're really waiting for something positive. I mean, most of what goes on is criticism. And it's easy to criticize the standardized testing movement. The real question is, what's your option? What's your alternative? And it's not enough. I mean, I think people have got ideas about that, but I felt for a long time that in this network there is a lot of methodology and accomplishment. But it's still much too small. The scale is way, way, way too small. So I guess I have a little bit of ambivalence, about getting the message out. Because I still think we have a lot to learn about that scaling process. But as that develops, then we really need to get the message out. But I think the time is when you can say, we really do know how to work with 50 school systems. And here are 20 or 30 or 40 that are really moving. And you know what? They look like the schools of America. So that's the other thing, of course, that's very important. That it really has to encompass the range of conditions. Because, in this country, particularly those of you from outside the country, you may or may not appreciate it, we have a two-tier system right now. I mean, we have a tremendous inequity in our schools, just unbelievable. On the whole, I think the schools are very ineffective, but mainly because of circumstance. Some kids are going to move along, and a lot of kids won't. It's been over a decade that in this country it's more likely that an African-American boy growing up in an American city will end up in prison than any form of tertiary education. That's been true for 10 years. So we have to show that not only it can be done at a scale, but it can be done in the settings, in the contexts where it really matters. And it's been wonderful to watch, just very naturally. I think so many of the leaders in this network, who are all of you, have naturally gravitated towards demonstrating that you can really work in tough settings, you can really accomplish something. So I see it's kind of a two-step. It's really getting better and better at reaching a scale. That's why Tracy and I and the Waters Network group are so pleased to get the chance to work with Winston-Salem right now. It's just a perfect example of a large urban district that has a lot of the demographics and the conditions of a lot of urban districts, and to be able to work with the system as a whole. Again, I think a 10, 15 like this, and then we'll really have a story. Because I think right now we've got all the elements of a story, but we don't yet have the evidence. Now, it's, who knows, on the timing of all that. But I think Jay's absolutely right. One, the conditions are right, and two, it does come down to getting some people who will be really good at getting that story told when the time is right.
Well, I'm not sure there is any fundamental difference. Both of them deal with long-term issues. Both of them deal with issues that the public is troubled by, ambivalent about. Both of them have dissatisfaction with what is happening. And I think you just need to crystallize that into some sort of aggressive response. I have been spending some time trying to raise $100 million for the next major phase of this. Unsuccessful so far, but I haven't given up. But it would be easier if there was a growing public demand for doing something.
So one difference I thought about was everybody's been through this system. Everybody has an idea, and I wonder how that would affect, what the response to anything we might come up with.
Well, just picking up, I think Jay's absolutely right. There are a lot of parallels. The anchor, which you're kind of referring to, Paul, that we all went to school, so we kind of have this idea of how schools should work, is certainly true. But against that, you have to weigh the growing dissatisfaction. And I think they're both really true. And that's why I keep coming back to, we've seen this for years. We know that, without doubt, the single most effective thing we could do for someone who's interested is take them to a school. You said that yourself. They see what's possible. And they always go, wow. Rob, is Rob here now? I saw Al come in, yeah. Well, so for the last couple of years, we've been taking people just to see Rob's 8th grade algebra class. And there's a lot of good examples like that. That's mainly because he's here in Massachusetts, easy to organize a business. And people are astounded to watch kids teaching each other algebra. And to see this fundamental shift of a teacher from being, I'm sure Rob was, a very, very good instructor, to being a designer. And Rob, of course, very articulate about what that has taken in his own practice as a professional. So that's like step one. You kind of see it, you go, wow. Step two is obviously, how could we do it? So, I think step one we're pretty good at. And we've been doing the same thing with the Borton School in Tucson, because obviously the early years are so important. And people go and they see the kids in kindergarten with all their behavior over time charts, and you sit down and talk with these 6-year-olds, and you're just astounded at their articulateness and their self-confidence. So I think that's really doable. You could easily imagine doing that in video, you could imagine movies, but I think that next step, it maybe goes, yeah, but what can we do? How do we do that? I mean, this maybe is just a super gifted guy, or this amazing group of people who created this wonderful K-2 school, or now K-3 or 4 school. But that's why I said before, it was so important here, really, is that there really are methods. There really are kind of approaches. And we just got to get much better at making those accessible, I think, combined with the real direct experience of that this really can be done. As I say, the next question is, how do I do it? And you got to be able to kind of cross both of those little bridges.
Well, a curly-headed kid with a bright, shiny smile heard the roar of a plane as it sailed through the sky. To her playmate she cried with a twinkle in her eye, "My daddy flies that ship in the sky. My daddy flies that ship in the sky. My daddy flies that ship in the sky. Mama's not afraid, neither am I, 'cause my daddy flies that ship in the sky." Then a pug-nosed kid, he kicked up his heel, said, "My daddy works in the iron and steel. My dad builds planes so they fly through the sky. And that's what keeps your daddy up there so high. That's what keeps your daddy up there so high. That's what keeps your daddy up there so high. You're not afraid, well, neither am I, 'cause my daddy keeps your daddy up there so high." Then a shy little girl pinched her toe in the sand and said, "My daddy works in that place where they land. You tell your